Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see everybody. Welcome to your first breakout of DHF 24. My name is Greg Snyder. I'm one of the team members at the Aspen Group. For those of you that don't know us yet, Aspen Group is a firm that for 30 years now has been solely focused on helping churches create space for ministry impact. And so this very room you're sitting in did not used to exist. This actually was a gym, and so the floor you're sitting on or standing on right now actually was added to this to make this two-story space a few years back. And so just some of the work that Aspen's done here, and if you're seeing the pictures out in the lobby, you'll see some of the stuff that we're working on, and hoping that when you all come back next year, the lobby and the sanctuary will be completely transformed. And if it's not, you probably won't see me here because I'll be in trouble from a lot of people. So you're in for a treat. I'm not your presenter this morning, but Derek Stark on our team is going to bring some fresh learning. Aspen Group does a lot of research, we believe, in order to help the church. We need to understand the church well. We need to understand what's happening in the culture that's affecting the church. So we have partnered for years with the Barna Group, which many of you are familiar with, and we do research projects with Barna to understand culture, to help the church navigate where ministry is going, and we want to lead that with space. And if we're truly going to have space that impacts ministry, we need to be designing and building for the future. So Derek Stark, who's going to be presenting for us, grew up in Tennessee, went to high school over in Pekin, Illinois, so he's got some central Illinois experience. Now living up in Chicago after he graduated from ONU. Any Tiger fans in the house? There's got to be one or two, right? ONU Tigers. So, although Tiger's probably thinking baseball, I messed that up. So Derek graduated from Olivet in 22. Worked for a while with Community Christian up in Chicago, where he now lives, and had joined our team about a year ago. And so he's here to kind of share with us his insights, what he's learning from our research and from his experience. And I forgot to mention he's a PK, so be gentle with him.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you guys doing today? Good. Greg said, I'm on the team at Aspen. My title, I'm technically in marketing. You might ask what that means. Technically, I would say, okay, I'm here to promote the company. But honestly, I just want to lead you guys into a conversation today about what it means to craft beautiful spaces that build faith. I think a lot of what my job is to help people understand the impact of design and the beauty of it, and that has on our spiritual walk with the Lord, but also on some psychological, emotional, and spiritual levels as well. So today I want us to camp out around this question. When you read these questions, there will be a few of them. This will be the one that really leads a lot of the charge today. But what I want you to do is I want you to think about this in your own context. One thing about ministry is that it's all contextual to where you're at. While there are those practices that vary and range across the church, when it comes to space, that is very contextual to what you have going on in your physical building right now. So today, we're going to camp out around this question. What does it mean for your church to intentionally build and design space that cultivates an atmosphere where people grow in their faith? Before we dive into the content today, I want to explain a few things that this talk will not be. First, I will not be offering you a 5-step process on how to design a beautiful church. While you might be looking towards your next building project, I'm not an architect, nor am I going to pose as an architect, nor do I want to pose as an architect. I can give you 5 steps or 10 steps to ensure that your design could go accordingly to the needs of your context, But for what this conference is all about, discipleship, I don't think that would be conducive to the bigger picture. Second, this talk will not serve as a presentation with all the answers you will need for your building's design and how it will impact your ministry. I do not have the answers, but I do have research conducted with Barna Group that provides insight into the trends we are seeing across religious affiliates in different generations as well. Religious and non-religious people are looking for ethereal answers and divine inspiration. What Barna Group has researched directly correlates to how we design, build, and furnish the churches and the partners we get to work with. Along with research, I also have stories. Stories of how beautifully crafted spaces have shaped the trajectory of the ministry, the vision, and the mission set out by the church, but not only from our clients, but also in my context as a PK and in ministry as well. Lastly, this talk will not serve as a one-size-fits-all solution. As many of us know in the room, building the kingdom, both figuratively and literally, is a very multifaceted task, with hopes that God's name will be brought about the world in life-changing ways. Ministry is incredibly contextual. Demographics, attendance, and budgets, they all change. So why would Aspen Group prescribe a one-size-fits-all solution that, in hopes that it would affect the work for your specific, beautiful, and lively context without even having a conversation with you? Now we got out of the way, let's talk about what this talk is really about. At Aspen Group, we really believe that crafting spaces and building faith matter. This isn't some corporate lingo that's reflected in the cute marketing strategy. However, it's really impacted in the level of our design teams, our architects, our project developers, and all the way up to the top with our CEO and president as well. It's what we seek to accomplish with each and every client that we work with. The vantage point we have in our experience is that we have seen how building beautiful spaces impacts the trajectory of discipleship, spiritual formation, and community building. As we invite you into this conversation today, take a moment to think about this important question. Next, I want to talk about our partnership with Barna. This is the question I have right now. Is your church space taking advantage of the beauty that's already accessible to foster community or transcendence? That's where we're going to camp out in this next section, and I want you to keep that in the back of your mind. Let's take a journey through the data that Barna Group illustrates in their research to help us out with this. Over the last decade, Aspen Group has had the privilege of working with Barna Group to research different trends in the church that are affected by space. The two journals currently published, Making Space for Community and Making Space for Inspiration, help highlight the importance that physical space has, and its appeal are directly correlated to spiritual formation here in the United States. I'm going to ask you a question right now. This is not rhetorical, so if you have an answer to it, please raise your hand or just shout it out. It doesn't bother me. But if I were to ask you, which I'm going to ask you right now, where do you think most U.S. adults feel a sense of transcendence or closeness to God? What would you say?
Nature.
Awesome. Well, I think we naturally would all like to say the church, but according to the research, 70% of U.S. adults say that nature is the #1 environment where they experience transcendence. Now, instead of trying to change that narrative, what Aspen has sought to do is started taking the research done by Barna, and along with some of the facts we know from the American Institute of Architects, to creatively design ways for our congregations to connect with nature while still in church. Not only does this promote spiritual formation by feeling close to God, being in nature, knowing this fact now, but it also seeks to provide inspiration to those who connect with God through the natural experience. The beauty of nature is found within its accessibility to most people and the response that it elicits in that as well. We are not vying for oceanside churches and churches at the base of a mountain. Now, we all can agree that those would be very beautiful. However, we are landlocked. We are in Illinois right now. We are not vying for that. Rather, we're vying for courtyards that promote and are used for prayer and meditation. Open windows that allow natural light in, and patio space where people can gather and build community in fresh air. While innovative designs like this can seem daunting, we want to assure you that it's very doable, no matter the size of the budget at hand. Now, before I talk about our next statistic, I want everyone to play a little game. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. Everyone close your eyes. I'm looking up here so I know if your eyes are not closed. If you believe that the church should reflect the beauty of God, the physical church should reflect the beauty of God, please raise your hand. Okay, go ahead and put it down. As I looked around the room, the statistic you see on the screen right here is shown without it. 2/3 of U.S. adults, both Christians and non-Christians, believe that the church should reflect the beauty of God. Evidently, with what I saw at least, I know you guys didn't see it, that directly coincides with the statistics in this room. Author and pastor Jay Kim at Westgate Church talks about the importance of lingering spots. Lingering spots are spots that are intentionally designed and accessible to your congregation to build community, for them to spend time in, and spots that promote fellowship within your church. At Westgate, when designing this campus, they sought out to intentionally design spots where people could spend time in together. One of the cool things that has happened in these spots is that at Westgate, the younger generation of the church will all leave after the 11:15 a.m. service. They'll go a few streets over to where all the restaurants are in this spot of California. They all pick up their food, and instead of eating there like I feel like most of us might do, they actually bring their food back to the church. And then from 1 to 5 p.m., what has happened on a Sunday basis over the last 2 years, this young adult community actually spends time, they hang out at the church, they eat with one another, they build deep relationships, they play spike ball and volleyball, and they just seek to be the community of the church where they are. That's a pretty cool story, if you ask me. One of the things that they're now having to figure out is how can they add more lingering spots in their campus so that this can continue to happen, not just for younger generations, but older generations as well. Crafting beautiful spaces directly contributes to building faith, especially in communal settings. Now take a second to think about it. Is your church currently taking advantage of the beautiful spaces that it already has accessible to foster community or transcendence, the two things that a lot of people are looking for? In this next section, I want to talk about our clients and some of the stories that they've had through this narrative. Now, for this section, I don't have a question per se for us to think about, but I have a story of a woman who goes to church in Osterville, Massachusetts, with one of the new clients that we're working with. No matter how we spin it, community is often fostered where people want to spend time. When it comes to space that intentionally cultivates an atmosphere of spiritual growth, our project with Osterville Baptist Church in Osterville, Massachusetts, combines the need for deeply valuing tradition, ensuring that the next generation is met where they're at. This church has served as a historical landmark in Osterville and is known by a plethora of influential community members. They're recognized by government officials, people in not just the congregation, but people outside the congregation as well. Go there in times of need, and they've served as a beacon of hope for a long time. And when I say a long time, we can think 30, 40, 50 years, but this church has been around for 185 years. Pastor Rob Wheeler came to Aspen Group with a need for redesigning the space. He sought out to combine the tradition of the church while revamping some of the beauty that it once previously held. Serving as this historic landmark in the community, OBC has been carrying out the call for 185 years. With longevity like that comes the need to revamp space. I want you to take your church, for example. The 30, 40, 50 years, if it's been longer, praise God. But if it's 30 to 40 to 50 years being there in the community, think about some of the things that might be there. There might be some structural implications that need to be fixed. There might need to be some designs that need to be updated. With longevity comes a need for change. And not change in some drastic way, but change to make sure that people are feeling welcome and hospitable and invited into a space where they're going to give time to walk with the Lord. At the center of OBC's building mission sits the idea that the younger generation will inherit a beautiful church that will, a beautiful church that will continue out its ministry. Pastor Rob and the OBC team wanted to ensure that when this church came time and when his ministry ended, that when they passed it down to the future generations, that would go smoothly. Not only does this space matter to our spiritual formation, but space also matters to younger generations and how we view the church. I say we because I'm a part of that younger generation. By making it more inviting, hospitable, welcoming, and beautiful, the new outdoor space and lobby will help the community connect with nature in the heart of Osterville. Now, when I say in the heart of Osterville, I'm just saying I'll be showing you a video from this church, and you'll see where it's located at in the community. Miss Diane, a member of OBC, is excited about the upcoming renovations that are happening there. Not because of how pretty the campus will be, not because it's going to attract so many more people or make it even bigger. Miss Diane believes that no matter how someone walks through the doors of OBC, broken or healed, whether they're know Christ or they don't know Christ, whether they're rich or poor, they will be accepted and loved for who they are. They'll be cherished in their attendance at this church. Through these designs and how these spaces will be used, the tradition of love, acceptance, and generosity will be faithfully modeled and passed down to those who are part of OBC's future. I want us to go ahead and watch Miss Diane's story.
There was nowhere to go, and I had called out to God.
There are so many reasons why beautiful design positively impacts the church. It's the unspoken needs met by being comfortable in a space. It's the way flow is intentionally directed to ensure safety. And it's the communities built that are all byproducts of beautiful design. Our holistic, not just Aspen Group, understanding of the church, understanding of church design helps promote the concepts of discipleship that are needed in all churches. While aspects such as formation, inspiration, community building, and hospitality may all take place in different spaces, the research and stories show that these concepts are enhanced through intentional design. The physical spaces we find ourselves are constant factors in how we are shaped, molded, and formed. This next section, I want to talk about how physical space matters to generations. For this section, my question is, has your physical space set out to create a vibe that attracts younger generations, or has it become a space for all generations to experience spiritual formation? The research at Barna shows us that space matters intergenerationally. Each generation of Christ followers seeks a space where they can be formed and matured spiritually. Instead of rattling off more statistics, I want to share a personal story of how space has affected the ministries that I have been a part of. While I hope many of you throughout this presentation have picked up on the deep love that I have for the local church, its beauty and the power that it has on all of our communities, I want to give you a brief background from where this stems from. For 18 years, I grew up in a pastoral family. My dad was the lead pastor for 18 years, and we met over a variety of contexts. I think I've been a part of 6 different churches while he was a pastor at four different ones of those. 2 of those were in my ministry. Our family ministered in a variety of contexts, which meant we met in a lot of different environments. To the beautiful church sitting on the hill, the white painted church that was in Erie, Tennessee, a town of about 2,500 people, to a grungy concert venue in downtown Chicago. I've been fortunate to experience the presence of God in many different atmospheres. Prior to joining ministry, like Greg said, I was in full-time vocational ministry with Community Christian Church, where we met in that grungy concert venue that I talked about. This is where I realized the importance of space and using it as an opportunity for formation. At the time, it was coming right out of COVID, so we were the cool, progressive Trinity Church that met in a concert venue. We opened up the doors and we invited everyone in. I mean, theoretically, which cool, trendy, hip Gen Z or millennial wouldn't want to come check us out? After a year and a half, while steadily growing, we realized that this wasn't the formative space that we wanted to meet in. We realized that even though we were growing steadily, what we were seeing was that the space wasn't conducive to the ministry that we were conducting. For instance, there was a bar as soon as you walked into the concert venue where that was lined with liquor. And now, I mean, if you don't know much about Chicago, going for church space in Chicago is a feat in and of itself. So meeting in the concert venue was really about all that we could do coming out of COVID. But because they were holding concerts for pretty famous artists, they had a bar that lined the back wall with liquor and liquor and liquor. And that's the first thing that you saw as you walked into the space. Along with that, as our children's ministry continued growing, we had to put the kids out in the lobby to worship because we didn't have any space. This wasn't our space. We weren't able to design. And they were right there with the bar as well, right as you walked into the lobby, or walked into the space. And so what happened was now families, as they walked in, were seeing all of this alcohol, and then to the right, they were seeing their children. Not necessarily super conducive for a space of safety and formation. The detached levels of the balcony that were in the building itself, they were really high up. And it often caused dissonance among the members that sat on the floor and then that also sat in the balcony as well. Again, I don't think this is necessarily a space for inspiration, community, or formation. That's why we ended up moving. Once we made this realization, it was time for us to move venues where we could give the formative experience that we had hoped. While Jesus' bride, the church, is inherently beautiful, informative, Jesus' church was never meant to be a home. We thought what we were doing was contextual to the city, but instead, we were giving them something completely different. People longed for a space where they could come in on Sunday mornings and know that the church was going to help them form in maturity with Christ, that we were going to walk alongside of them. I tell you this story is not as some one-size-fits-all prescription for design, but to highlight how the spaces we meet in are spiritually formative in and of themselves. The bar at the front of the venue, for 2 reasons, would not have been welcoming. One, to the single father who was struggling with alcoholism, would not have been very inviting to him. Or maybe it was the couple that was new to church that had spent 2 nights prior partying until the wee hours of the morning. Again, not super inviting for people who are wanting spiritual formation. To help reiterate some of the things that I've talked about throughout this section and the section with our clients, I want to play our brand film to help illuminate some of the ideas that we have talked about to help bring this together.
crafting spaces, building faith.
It's not that beauty and aesthetic don't have a place in the church. Beauty has always been a part of God's design. However, we need to be careful of how our increasingly post-Christian context speaks into our designs, our venues, and the settings that we meet in as a church. Where we meet, especially in a spiritual setting, speaks a language without words. Our surroundings have a constant way of forming us and our congregations, and are a key component in attracting those that we seek to serve and reach. So that brings me back to this question. Has your physical space sought to create a vibe that attracts the younger generations, or has it become a space for all generations to experience spiritual formation? As I conclude this presentation, I want you to take a moment to jot down these questions. They have been the ones that I've asked so far, and what they will help you do is reflect on the time and the things that I've talked about. We hope to invite you into a conversation and continue inviting you into this conversation as what we do in the brand film matters. We hope to seek to build a better future for the church through design. As we conclude, I want you to remember this. You don't always have to spend tons of money to enhance your space. There are other ways to make that fit in your context, your budget, and your congregation. However, taking the time to think through your church's design could be incredibly beneficial to the ministry that you're conducting, the ministry that you're living out. It could really help those who are in search of spiritual formation and discipleship. Because like we said, the spaces that we meet in speak a language without words. Crafting spaces and building faith. That's at the center of Aspen Group's message, and we hope we've invited you into a conversation that gets you to think about your space today. That's all I have on this, but I would like to invite Josh and Greg up to the stage if any of you guys have questions. They thought they were going to get off easy.
Can you put that last slide back?
Yeah,
please?
absolutely.
Thank you.
That one?
I don't know, Gen X and nothing. I can't remember else in the picture, sorry.
That video catches my, takes my breath away every once, whenever I watch it again. There's just something about, there is something about space. I know for me, personally, it's why it's attracted to the Aspen Group, but when you walk into a space, you're moved, and oftentimes it can be really good. There's been some hotels that I've walked into that didn't move me really great, but other places where it almost takes your breath away, so it is a reminder, significance of it.
Are there any questions that come to mind throughout this presentation?
Or do you have any questions about your space? Yeah, did you really got anything they're stuck on?
So how did you, I'm one of those people who don't like silence, so I'm not the talker. I'm that person, my husband's gonna crawl. Yeah, right here. How did when you worked through with the churches, how did you work through the barriers of the, lack of better words, worship to the building? You know, the building, our church has been around, what, 150 years, Gary, 250? 250? 190, sorry.
Coming up on 190.
190. And everything has a label. This was donated by Dr. Seuss, this was donated by... Are we the only church that has that?
Like a sacred cattle wandering the hall.
Yes, yes. How do you work through that? Because I'm just thinking, you know, we don't have like a coffee bar or anything like that to even mingle. It's a beautiful church. There's nothing It is. And we recently had rained down in the last 8 years the sanctuary, so it kind of lightened it up, but it's still the authentic pews. So how did you work through the staunch, that's the word, individuals to help move that change? Or was that something that the church took a risk of losing individuals because of the change? Is that outside the scope of Aspen? I'm so sorry. That you worked
No, we help churches lose people all the time.
But we're trying to get them healed.
Yeah, let's change does that. I think there's some conversations in the room that there's probably pastors that can speak into this better than we can. Yes, sir.
How do you deal with the traditions of the two or three generations? You know, like the older ones in retirement, or those who want hymns and they don't like praise music and they want a pulpit and they want a communion table up there. How did you determine what would work for both? Because in some places that I've been, you can't move this, or you can't move that, and all that.
Yeah, I think both of these questions are super important, and it starts with, and it's a longer process than you think of architects and you're like, well, I need these 4 walls to hold this many people, and that's what you're going to draw. And to make this kind of change is a big leadership journey, and it takes a little bit longer than just a drawing. We actually, there was another church here locally that asked us one time to come and draw some pictures that would help move their people from their beautiful downtown building to a contemporary building outside of town. And they said, we've got about 6 weeks to make a decision to buy this piece of property, so if you just help create some pictures, we'll show it to people, and they'll want to go with us. And we said, we absolutely will not do that. Drawing pictures and showing people pretty pictures are not going to move them.
Yeah.
When you're talking about the deep things of history and our faith, and this is where I got married, and this is where we buried Grandpa, and that this change is very personal. So it can't be done with what we're going to do. It has to be conversations of why we're doing what we do, and why the changes that we're making matter. So it really takes a compelling vision from leadership of, we're trying to get from here to there and paint the picture of what here to there is without it being pew to theater seat, because who's going to vote for that? And we do a lot of that. But we still have churches we put pews in too. So it's not about, as Derek said it's not about what's trendy. It's not about what's cool. It's really about what works with the intersection of your church and the intersection of your culture and the people you're trying to reach.
Yeah.
So we spend time really in discovery, trying to help churches understand who it is they're trying to reach, why, and finding that intersection of your ministry and the culture and your community. And so I made that sound very simple. It's not that simple, but you can't solve it in 3 minutes. It's probably a 3-month to 3-year conversation in most contexts.
If you had which we have just purchased an outdoor space. We have one of these type of churches, but we were able to buy the lot beside us, and so we can develop this to be whatever. If you were going to choose, I don't know, 3 things that would blend the generations together, what would you put out in an outside space to draw them? It's a very broken community, small community, only 800 in the city, but it's also pretty broken. And so, like, what kind of things would draw the generations?
So I have a thought. I'm sure Josh does too. I feel him thinking behind me. I think in that context, probably the first thing we'd recommend is conversations with city leaders. What are people asking for and what are people needing in your community that the community doesn't already have, and do something in partnership. I think the church has missed a lot in the last several decades as we've become a little bit more about us four and no more, Sunday mornings, our people. When it used to be 50 years ago, the church was in and for the community. And 100 years ago, the church was building the hospitals and the colleges and other orphanages and services that were needed in the community. The church was at the forefront. And so I think it's important, if we're going to do anything we think we're doing for the community, we don't do it in our own thinking and in our own power, but we go and we do it in partnership. And I think that's just a great way, again, to bring salt and light to the world. You have a thought?
We've been doing this too long together. I didn't say a word. No, I think you're absolutely right. And casting a vision for those that you're trying to serve is obviously a key component to this. I love the story of Austerville Baptist and her story about coming to be at the church and what she saw when she walked in, and then that desire for her to communicate that to others. I think casting that vision is huge. And coming back to even those first two questions, I remember, I think, listening really carefully when we're talking about massive change to something that people hold so dear to their heart, something that they've grown up with, had huge spiritual moments, they've seen their children grow up and come to know Christ. There's a lot wrapped up into that we don't want to lose sight of. Listening carefully to those stories and understanding that, I think, is really important. And then also understanding, you've got those, we talked about Pastor talked about the prickly pears in our lives, or in our ministries that we run across. I'm thinking of a church just recently, I believe his name was Bill, but he was pretty set on the idea that I was promised that we're going to do anything, that if we were going to give money to this, we were going to have a commercial kitchen as part of this project. And I'm not going to move forward. And you could tell he was poised and ready to try to do whatever he could to thwart the project if there was not going to be a commercial kitchen involved in this. When that conversation had, it was a very different time and place, and it only took really understanding and leaning in and understanding. Tell me a little bit more about the kitchen and what are the hopes there and the desires. And it really came back to this time and this season where the women in the church, where there was such discipleship that was happening and community and connection that were happening inside that kitchen, that it's not at the same place right now. The desire was not for a kitchen, it was for that discipleship to be happening in that kitchen the way that we knew. And yet the young families that were coming to the church at that time were not going to be sitting there for the entire afternoon to cook. There was going to be some catered things that get brought in, that sort of thing, but understanding the why, and then helping them understand where that discipleship that he actually desired was going to actually be happening in this building, and it didn't need to have a complete commercial, very expensive kitchen placed into this for it to happen. The conversation started to change, but he felt heard and understood. But we can easily get into a spot where we're like, how do we avoid having the conversation with Bill? Because all he wants is a kitchen. Every time he talks to us, it's about a kitchen. And we can't do a kitchen. So you're left with either we do a kitchen or deal with the fallout. I think it needs to be a deeper conversations that we have with people to lead into the fears of what they're actually worried about losing in the change.
Y'all, we had a church that built, the congregation's 120 years old, and we bought 60 years ago land out in literally cow pasture with a dirt road in front of it. Now there's a big 4-lane street there and connected to the main city. And we built the church 40 years ago out there. We were down in an old part of Texas. Anyway, we just went through 2 floods. Our church got flooded in 2016, 2018, bang bang right behind each other. We rebuilt it now. We were virtually broke. We got a nice building. We got a new preacher. We're growing again. And we're thinking long term. We've changed stuff on the inside already. We kind of modernized and repainted this outside, made it look more traditional. But we're at the point where we want to look long term. I'm 74 years old. I'm not going to be around for long, ever. But I can envision us having over, 5 times the attendance or more, 5, 6 times the attendance we have right now. We were a very large church a number of years ago, 30 years ago. we went down there. Do y'all come in and like, we would want to do some small things initially, but eventually we're going to do some big things. How do you work with that situation?
So
Do
you
you
need
work with
his
that? How do
business
you work
card.
with that?
You need his business card for a longer conversation.
Okay.
Something, I didn't hear you say this, but I want to say it out loud. We do not subscribe at all to build it and they will come. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I haven't seen a church build a beautiful building and it fill up with people.
No, I understand.
Buildings
No.
fill and churches grow because there's healthy ministry
Correct.
going on
Correct.
in that building.
Correct.
Now, what we do in coming alongside a church that wants to look at a long-term vision is we look at the growth engines of the church. What's causing the growth? Are there barriers to that growth? And are there barriers we can move with facilities? And are there growth engines we can fuel with renovations or facilities?
Okay.
My home church, we were 17 years ago, 50 people, and numbers don't matter to me, but just for context, it's 1,000 today, 17 years later. 4 major building projects with about 3 minor renovations in between those 4 major over time in small steps, not we're going to build this big thing, this big auditorium, fill this big auditorium.
I understand that, and I'm totally on board. We do have a new ministry, and we have doubled our attendance in the last year, and we're growing. And so we are in that mode,
Yeah.
and we've turned the corner, okay, and we're doing very well, and I see us continuing to grow.
That's exactly how our conversations start, and that's why I say about an hour-long conversation with this guy, you'll have all kinds of answers.
As the minister for the church that he's talking about,
That's the man.
our space, we have 34,000 square foot, but it was built 40 years ago, and it looks like it was built 40 years ago. And that's really where our problem is. It's not made for, the space is not able to fit what we needed because it's cut up the way it's cut up.
If I can tell you too, another tidbit to write down, every church that we walk into just about wants to add space to make their space better. And a phrase we love around our office is good space added to bad space is still bad space. And most designers want to come in and hear what you're trying to accomplish and then draw you new space to accomplish that, when that type of scenario often is a renovation. Most churches I walk into have enough square footage. It's just not laid out right, it's not designed right, it's not functioning. Winston Churchill said, we shape our buildings there after they shape us. There's so much truth to that. When you think about having a 40-year-old building, you know what? That building wasn't broke 40 years ago. It was probably designed perfectly to do what it needed to do 40 years ago. But nothing's changed in 40 years, right? Culture's same, ministry's the same, so the building still works. No, we find our buildings aren't working, not because they're old, because they were designed to do a different ministry in a different day and age. And so, again, to some of Derek's points, it's like updating isn't just about pretty, it isn't just about new colors or fresh carpet. Yes, get rid of your orange shag if you have it, but an intentional plan for your facility to do ministry in 2024 and beyond is really important. It's important work to do, but definitely please do not let somebody come out onto your building. If you got stuff in your building you need to fix.
We got plenty of space, but it needs to be used better.
Yeah.
And that's part of the conversation is really looking, because you've never walked into a church that they've been like, we just have way more money and resources than we could ever spend. So it's just like,
Wait a minute, are any of you here?
so there's always an aspect of phasing, right? There's idea of growth and continuing, even if you maximize all, how many acres did you say you guys have?
25.
20, if you maximize all 25, great, praise the Lord. Then what's next? Like, are we planting all those things? So I think the key though is like looking at where are the opportunities in the near future and saying, of those things that we could do and we'd love to do, where are we gonna see the most momentum? Like what's actually gonna fuel the momentum, the thing that God is doing currently? Yeah, there might be some real aspirational big things, like we wanna start a brand new ministry that hits this whole other demographic. Great, but let's not lose sight of actually where the momentum currently is and remove some of the barriers that are keeping you from taking next steps. And that's not just a real quick conversation, that's kind of a deep dive. So you can make some strategic moves now that might not be a massive change that could really fuel. I say that, make those strategic moves and tie it back to the vision and mission, and continue to fuel the momentum. So you do, how many phases total is Hickory?
7.
7 phases.
In 17 years.
Yeah. So.
Which sounds crazy. It's like you're always building or renovating, but we're also 1,000 people and 15,000 square feet on 4 acres. So if any of you know church sizes, we're really, really small, really compact. So we probably have time for one more question, or you're going to be late for lunch.
Yeah, we're dealing with a building that was built in 1888. It's 135 years old, and the congregation started in 1834. So, we've been around. And we're known as the red brick church on the corner. But, there are things that we probably would like to do, but physically, where are we going to put them? That's, in a building that is that old, I mean, it's in great shape for being that old. But, if we expanded and had, 2 or 3 more youth group classes, we don't have a place to put them. That's just the reality that we have with our building. We got many different levels, but we are ADA accessible because about 20 years ago we put in an elevator. So
Is it fairly traditional?
we can get people off the street into the church.
So with that, what Gary was just sharing is that we do have difference of opinion. We do have space that we could probably do something to make people want to linger more, because it's very staunch when you walk in. It's a very, and so it's not inviting. The sad part is we've lost a lot of our younger couples because we don't, but that's the strategic part. That's the part that we've got to figure out what the community needs, what we can do, and what we need to do differently to minister to that group, and what do we need to have to minister in the space that we currently have.
And you probably have some really neat assets with regards to the traditional aspect of the building that's going to be really compelling and draw, especially the younger demographic that's looking for something different. The trick is, how do we now create also those kinds of connection spaces?
On the connection, I would just, again, encourage everybody, what has changed is, and I'll show my age here a little bit, because I used to worship in a room that when worship was over, we went under that room. Remember fellowship halls? Under the sanctuary?
We got it.
We had one. So that's where we fellowshipped. But in our culture today, most churches' fellowship is not under the sanctuary anymore. It's on the way in and on the way out. And that's why today, new churches being built, lobbies are 1-to-1 square footage of worship. Your lobby's as big as your worship. And coffee bars aren't, we don't have coffee bars in churches because of Starbucks. We have coffee bars in churches because that's now the culture's hospitality, and that's how we build relationship and connection. And in the world today, that could be some of the most important space in your building. We in our surveys too, and are working with hundreds of churches, there's 2 main reasons people come to church. Number one is to encounter God. And that primarily happens in the sanctuary, though it happens in classrooms and other spaces as well. But we plan on people encountering God in worship. And the second reason they come to church is to socialize with their brothers and sisters in Christ and have very deep conversations and very high-level, loose conversations about yesterday's game on TV. But where are people in those relationships, and where are they connecting? And in our culture today is my last pitch, and we'll get you lunch. The world is becoming more disconnected. There's more mental health issues, suicides staggering, all of those things that we all see. People need relationship. People need to be loved. The church has the greatest opportunity in the U.S. right now to reach people with the love of Christ. So whatever your spaces are, and look at them and go, is there anything we can do that would make somebody linger 5 minutes longer? Because 5 minutes might change somebody's life.